Over my shoulder is the new Nissan X-Trail E-Power Hybrid, and I've actually been really excited to drive this new version of the X-Trail because the new Gen X-Trail is so much better to drive than the old one, but as standard it comes with a pretty old school 2.5 litre non-turbo engine. Well, not this one, because the X-Trail E-Power Hybrid does something pretty cool. It's got two electric motors, one on the front axle, one on the rear axle. It's got a small turbocharged petrol engine that acts as a generator for those motors most of the time. And in fact, there's no physical connection between the engines and the wheels of this car. So it does hybrid quite differently to something like a Toyota RAV4 hybrid. Now, the catch is this thing is not as fuel efficient as a RAV4 hybrid, but, and it's a massive but, it's a lot more refined to drive, so you might not care about that shortfall in economy. Plus, it's still pretty frugal. So in today's video, I'm going to take you through what the X-Trail Hybrid does well, what it gets wrong, and what other cars in this segment you should closely consider for your next family SUV. Of course, we'll take a look inside the back seat and the boot. We'll discuss the running costs. I'll tell you exactly how much fuel this SUV uses out here in the real world, and then we'll sum it up and talk about whether you should join the wait list for an X-Trail E-Power E-Force Hybrid. Before we get started, hit subscribe down below. Chasing cars, honest reviews of your next car. Brought to you by Budget Direct. To put it very bluntly, the previous generation X-Trail always felt like a bit of an appliance, and it drove that way too. But with this new generation X-Trail on a new platform, Nissan has really upped the ante in terms of making it feel more premium. But honestly, they've kind of done that without jacking the prices up or saying that they're trying to go really premium, and I think that's good. Obviously, prices are up a little bit. I mean, everything is in the economy right now, and the hybrid models do sit at the top of the tree, but I don't think this car is outrageously priced, especially when you look at the interior, and you're getting a really nice cabin with this car that definitely feels a cut above something like a Toyota RAV4 or a Hyundai Tucson, for instance. And that comes down to material quality, and it comes down to a bunch of nice standard features. And that starts with this Ti-L's very comfortable seats, which have a quilted Napa leather finish to them. Very nice. You can get this black, or you can get a two-tone caramel and black. That's obviously the way to go, although I'm not sure that would pair super well with the champagne hero color of the car. Maybe under like a navy or a black though, it could look quite nice. And you do get this brown upper dashboard, so this kind of mocha treatment in the car. That won't be for everyone, but it doesn't make a big difference to me. Another thing I like is that you get this kind of open pore look wood trim. It's not real, unfortunately, it is plastic, but it's a very good imitation, and it looks quite nice and makes this car feel more, I guess, expensive, as does the Napa leather finish on the steering wheel. New wheel, same as in the Nissan Z sports car. We've got these square buttons here. That looks really cool. So the fit and finish and the materials is definitely a big step above the old X-Trail, and at the really pointy end of the mainstream midsize SUV segment. In terms of the tech, it's pretty good. We've got a 12.3-inch touchscreen here, 12.3-inch digital instrument cluster, and a 10.8-inch color heads-up display. So it feels pretty up to the minute. Nissan's software looks a little bit dated. Some of the buttons look a bit dated, a bit 90s, but everything actually kind of comes together just fine. And we've got wireless Apple CarPlay, only wired Android Auto, but also built-in navigation. And if you go for the Ti-L, you get a Bose premium stereo. But even the standard stereo in the Ti sounds pretty good. And I think the Ti is enough for most people. It still has leather seats with the option of a lighter color, panoramic sunroof, Napa leather wheel, so you kind of don't have to go for the Ti-L if you don't really want all of the trimmings, and that's good. Storage is great. We've got wireless charging, big cup holders, a dual opening center bin, and huge door bins that will take a big water bottle as well. So all in all, this feels like a nice spot to sit as a driver, and you kind of got everything at your fingertips, which is good. The back seats of the X-Trail start impressively because look how wide this door opens. It's 85 degrees, it looks like 90 degrees, and the people that developed this car were at pains to make the point that they do in fact have real-world children, and they understand that it can be annoying to put car seats into SUVs whose doors just don't open wide enough, and that was a key development goal for families with the new Gen X-Trail, and it looks like it's worked. Now, when we get this car back to the Chasing Cars test track in Sydney, we'll fit our child's seats, we'll do it all properly and really give this car a test. But it's clear from where I'm sitting here, there's plenty of room in the second row. Now, I'm 6 foot, I have enough headroom. Even though the seat base feels quite high, There is a benefit to that though, because you have this kind of stadium seating, which is going to mean that kids sitting back here are less likely to get car sickness because they can actually see out the windscreen, which definitely helps. They can also see out these big side windows, and if you get the Ti-L, you get sunshades as well. The Ti-L, it might make sense for some families. You do get those sunshades, you also get memory seats up front, and you get heated seats in the back, which is nice if you live in the southern part of Australia and have quite cold winters. But all X-Trails have this nice leather trim. We've got air vents here for the second row, 4 USB ports for the car, and in fact a separate temperature zone here in the back seat, which is certainly a nice to have as well. We've got map pockets here. We've got a flip down centerpiece, which is actually like a 40-20-40 split, but you do have some cup holders and a device holder here, which is kind of nifty. And all in all, the room back here is good and the appointments are pretty decent. The only thing I could ping it for, which I know a lot of you won't care about at all, is that it's got scratchy rear plastics, but given that your kids will be back here, that might not be a downside. Moving around here to the back of the X-Trail now, and I think it's worth making a point about the design because I think it looks quite fresh from the front, although from the back, it's obvious that Nissan liked the way the old X-Trail looked because the new one looks basically the same, just with a little bit more muscle definition, and even the size of the car is very similar. It's slightly shorter, which we always like, easier to park, I guess, but a bit wider, which is going to make it more stable on the road, as we'll find shortly. But it's also a little bit taller, which is giving you a bit more practicality here in the boot. We've got a power tailgate, you get 3 beeps for some reason, and then that opens up to reveal a 575 litre cargo space. We've got a cargo blind here, we've got a little hidden compartment and Nissan's divide and hide storage system in the boot, which I've just dismantled accidentally, but it is very clever. One weak point of the X-Trail's boot is that the hybrid gets a tyre repair kit, which is annoying if you do a lot of country driving. Overseas, it is possible to get e-Power with a spare, so it's a bit unusual that Nissan Australia has gone without that feature here, but you can take that how you will. You can order an accessory, of course, and carry it in the boot or on the roof or something if that really mattered to you. There's a little bit of extra storage space here in the back, and then we've got buttons on the boot to either close the boot or to close it and lock the car so you can just walk away. But up next for us is the fuel economy. So a massively important part of this review is about the running costs of the X-Trail Hybrid, because of course it is more expensive to buy than the standard 2.5 litre version. So are you going to get your money's worth? Well, when it comes to fuel consumption, you probably are, and this thing is going to pay itself off over a few years. And that's because the standard 2.5 litre engine in our testing uses 9 or 10 litres per 100 Ks in normal driving. Whereas with the X-Trail E-Power Hybrid out here in the real world, I was able to get 6.7 litres per 100 Ks out of the Ti and about 7 litres flat out of the slightly heavier and better equipped Ti-L. Now, those are pretty good numbers, but a RAV4 hybrid will do closer to 5 litres per 100 Ks. So that's what I meant when I said that Nissan's hybrid system isn't quite as economical as Toyota's long-running version, but this car is quieter, torquier, and a little bit nicer to drive than a RAV4 hybrid. So that could be worth it in your mind. Now, this car can take 91 petrol, but Nissan says they recommend premium 95 octane. So you've got to work that into your budget as well when you do the maths. Now, what about servicing? Unfortunately, this car has relatively short service intervals of 12 months and 10,000 Ks, whereas a RAV4, for instance, would give you 15,000 kilometre intervals. Plus, the servicing is oddly expensive on this car, over $2,300 for 5 years and 50,000 Ks of servicing. That's something I think Nissan needs to work on bringing down in order to make this more competitive with other hybrid-powered SUVs, other SUVs in general. But the warranty on the X-Trail is 5 years with unlimited kilometres. So, the moment of truth, what is the X-Trail E-Power Hybrid like to drive on Aussie roads? Because, of course, my colleague Andy already drove this car in Slovenia, which I'm sure was very interesting, but the true test is the kind of road servicing that we have here in Australia. And I've been doing a lot of driving in the X-Trail E-Power over the last couple of days, hundreds of kilometres across heaps of different surfaces. As you can see right now, I'm in Brisbane CBD going over expansion joints, a great test of ride quality, but I've also driven all around the hinterland of southeast Queensland to get a feel for what this car is like on rough country roads and gravel. And I gotta tell you, not sponsored content, this car is really impressive to drive. Now, I'm pretty cynical I think a lot of Nissan's product over the last decade or so has been very forgettable, but clearly the brand is now turning a corner and is investing heavily in R&D and tuning to make that happen. Thank goodness, because the new X-Trail E-Power Hybrid feels like a laser-focused vehicle designed to take on the king and win. And of course, that car in this segment is the Toyota RAV4 Hybrid, not an easy vehicle to go up against. It's an absolute juggernaut in this country, but in a lot of ways, the X-Trail Hybrid delivers a significantly more refined driving experience. Now, I've already made super clear that Nissan acknowledges that this comes at a small fuel economy premium. So to go the same 100 kilometers in the X-Trail is going to use about another litre or two of petrol, and that's not nothing. But while it does use some additional fuel to get you the same distance, the X-Trail is doing it with a driving experience that is so much quieter, particularly when you do need to rev the engine and make solid progress quickly. And it also feels torquier and more natural underfoot, because the way Nissan has tuned the engine in this car feels really natural and really well done. Whereas I think with Toyota hybrids, we like how they drive, but they get very rowdy when you need to go fast because of the Atkinson cycle petrol engine that's attached to the electric hybrid system that becomes very, very revvy and raucous and coarse very quickly. And that's just not the case in the X-Trail. And that's one of the biggest differences between these two obvious competitors, is that the Nissan is quieter, it's torquier, and it feels more muscular. And that's despite having slightly less combined power. So we've got 157 kilowatts in this car, which is handily more than the non-hybrid version of the X-Trail, but a little bit less than something like a RAV4 hybrid or a Volkswagen Tiguan 162 TSI non-hybrid. But still, the performance claims are quite impressive. 7 seconds 0 to 100. But the way that the X-Trail gets there is impressive. So at lighter throttle, it actually limits the max RPM of the engine to under 2400 RPM. So it's using the turbocharged engine at its nice low quiet RPMs, and you just make progress mostly with no sound at all, because the engine is so quiet and difficult to hear, and so insulated with 7 kilos of padding behind this steering wheel, which is a lot. But then once you open up the throttle and you want to go a bit faster, it actually builds engine RPMs with vehicle speed as if it's like one fixed gear, and that means you're not hearing a droning CVT at maximum RPM while the car slowly gets faster, which is an odd disconnect for your ears. And the X-Trail doesn't behave that way, and I think it feels more natural to drive as a result. But there's no stepped gears or anything. It's not trying to fake an automatic transmission. It feels like a one-speed gearbox, and that's fine, but without that kind of elasticy rubber band effect, which is nice. And there are other interesting characteristics to how this engine works. Occasionally you'll hear the engine turn on. It's basically just replenishing the 2.1 kilowatt hour, 1.8 kilowatt hour usable battery, and then it kind of gets through some battery juice until the battery goes down to 25%, and then the engine will come back on and quietly recharge the battery. So almost all of the time, under most loads, the car is actually using battery power and driving the electric motors that way. But of course, under sustained high loads, like pulling uphill, towing, the engine is basically acting as a generator at all times, and it can drive the wheels via the inverter, but it doesn't ever have a mechanical connection to the wheels of the car, which is one way that it differs from many other hybrid systems. But the X-Trail in Australia is all-wheel drive only with e-Power. There is a front drive version, but as it sits here, it's got a 150 kilowatt front motor, 100 kilowatts on the rear, and it actually drives a bit more like an EV than most hybrids, with that perky EV-like throttle response and stronger regen braking. In fact, it even has an e-pedal mode that works reasonably well, if not as consistently as in a Nissan Leaf EV, for really quite strong regen. Speaking of towing, the X-Trail E-Power is rated to tow 1,650 kilos, which is about 350 kilos short of the non-hybrid version, but it's not a bad figure. You'll get a jet ski or a pair of those behind this car without issue, or like a very small caravan. But of course, if you want to tow heavier loads, you're going to need to look for a beefier vehicle than this one. Now, the E-Power in Australia comes with all-wheel drive as standard. There is a front drive version available overseas that might be considered later, but it's an incredibly fast system because it's a powerful 100 kilowatt rear electric motor, 150 kilowatt electric motor on the front, and it can shuffle torque in some absurd claim like 1/1000th of a second, which should be quick enough, I think, for most people. So even if the fronts have no traction at all, the rears are still going to be able to provide up to 100 kilowatts of power, which is enough to push this car out of a dodgy situation. And that's certainly a nice peace of mind to have. So while the engine and the hybrid system are kind of interesting and they're quiet and refined, it's actually the ride and handling of the X-Trail which is the impressive bit, because the ride quality is just exceptional. This car has a really resolved, plush ride, even over broken up roads, dodgy city potholes, and then really broken up country routes as well. The ride of this car is excellent, one of the best in the segment. Looking forward to doing a proper mega test and working out whether it's the best. In part, this comes at a small, expensive handling. The steering has a small dead spot on center. You do kind of have to push the car a little bit in order to, I guess, get it to start performing in a really sporty way in the corners. But the grip levels are quite faithful. The steering is decent enough, but a bit slower in the rack than some competitors. But it's enough for a family SUV. The X-Trail is a good partner on a country road, fairly confidence-inspiring, but basically this is about comfortable ride quality. And I think for a lot of family buyers, that's the goal, rather than being super sporty, you know, so it's comfy, it's quiet, and it's quite frugal. And it has low CO2 emissions, which could become very important if taxes in future become based on a car's CO2 outputs. As for safety, it's basically all standard. We've got forwards and reversing AEB, lane keep assist that's very smooth, adaptive cruise control. We've got a bunch of useful features on this car, plus a crystal clear 360-degree camera, which makes it a lot safer for maneuvering too. So those are my first impressions of the new X-Trail Hybrid. Does the midsize SUV segment have a new king? Well, quite possibly, because my first impressions from this first drive of the car are actually really strong. And unlike most first drives, this one has been really generous, like 400 kilometers of driving across country roads and in town. So pretty representative of what you do in normal day-to-day life here in Australia. The X-Trail Hybrid is punchy, powerful, quiet, and it's pretty fuel efficient as well, if not as frugal as the top of this class in terms of efficiency. But you know, I want to hear from you about whether you think Nissan has struck the right balance here, because they think they have. They're very confident about taking a small fuel economy hit to keep the car a bit quieter and a bit talkier. Let me know what you think of that down below. I even think it's fairly reasonably priced, especially in TI. Guys, you can give me your thoughts on that. I do read the comments and get back to as many as I can. While you're down there, hit subscribe, hit the notification bell, and as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.